The plasma cannon's barrel glowed red-hot as Marcus Chun adjusted his position behind the twisted remains of a Terran defense bunker. Around him, the smoking ruins of Colony 7 stretched toward a blood-orange sky, where alien ships still circled like mechanical vultures. The war had been raging for 3 years now, and humanity was losing badly. "Contact, 200 meters, northeast quadrant," whispered Sergeant Riley through the comm. His voice carried the exhaustion they all felt. The Zephyrian assault had been relentless for 6 days straight. Marcus peered through his scope, watching the tall, silver-skinned aliens move with their characteristic fluid grace between the destroyed buildings. The Zephyrians stood nearly 8 feet tall, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed almost ethereal in their beauty. It made killing them feel wrong somehow, even though they were trying to wipe out every human in the galaxy. The first contact had happened when humanity reached the Kepler system. We thought we were alone out here, exploring new worlds for our growing population. The Zephyrians thought differently. To them, humans were an infestation that needed to be eliminated before we could spread further into what they considered their territory. Marcus had joined the Colonial Marines after the attack on his homeworld. He'd watched his parents die in the first wave, their research station vaporized by Zephyrian beam weapons. The memory still burned in his chest, fueling the steady hand that now aimed at the alien patrol. "Wait," he breathed into his mic. Something was wrong with this picture. Through his scope, he could see 3 adult Zephyrians moving in formation. But there was something else. A smaller figure, maybe 4 feet tall, stumbled between them. It looked young, its silver skin darker than the adults, almost blue-tinged. The young one kept falling behind, and one of the adults would pause to help it along. "Riley, you seeing this?" Marcus whispered. "Yeah, looks like they got a kid with them. Probably using it as a human shield. Typical alien coward tactics." Marcus watched the group more carefully. The young Zephyrian wasn't being dragged or forced along. It was hurt. Dark blue fluid, probably blood, stained its leg. The adults weren't using it as a shield. They were protecting it, helping it walk. The tactical part of his brain said to take the shot. 3 enemy combatants, easy targets. But something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way the smaller Zephyrian leaned against what looked like its mother, or how carefully the adult supported its weight. "Chin, what's your status?" Riley's voice was getting impatient. Marcus moved his finger to the trigger. The crosshairs centered on the lead adult. One squeeze, and the war would have 3 fewer enemies. His breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped, muscle memory taking over from years of training and months of combat. The young Zephyrian stumbled and fell. Instead of leaving it behind or forcing it up, both adults immediately crouched down. One began examining the injured leg while the other kept watch. The care in their movements was unmistakably parental. "Contact lost," Marcus reported. They moved behind cover. It was a lie. He could still see them clearly through a gap in the rubble. The family, because that's what they were, he realized, huddled together while one adult tried to bandage the young ones wound with strips of fabric from their own clothing. "Damn it, Chun, we need to thin their numbers. Every alien we let go kills more humans tomorrow." Riley was right, of course. The Zephyrians had shown no mercy to human civilians. Entire colonies had been glassed from orbit. But watching this small family trying to survive in the ruins of what had probably been their target made Marcus's finger freeze on the trigger. The adult Zephyrians were soldiers. Their armor and weapons made that clear. But they were also parents. And the young one was just a child, caught up in a war it didn't start and couldn't understand. Minutes passed. The Zephyrian family finished their makeshift medical treatment and began moving again. They were heading toward the spaceport, probably trying to evacuate with the rest of their forces. Marcus tracked them through his scope, the perfect opportunity presenting itself multiple times. He never took the shot. "They're gone," he finally reported. The next morning brought a temporary ceasefire. Both sides needed to regroup, resupply, and tend to their wounded. Marcus found himself walking through the devastated colony, looking for supplies and survivors. The destruction was complete. Homes reduced to rubble, schools and hospitals targeted specifically by Zephyrian bombardment. He found a first human body in what used to be a playground. A woman, probably a teacher, had died shielding 3 small children with her body. None of them had survived. Marcus knelt beside them, feeling the familiar rage build in his chest. This was why the Zephyrians had to be stopped. This was why mercy was a luxury humanity couldn't afford. But as he stood to continue his search, something caught his eye. Tracks in the dust. The distinctive 3-toed prints of Zephyrian feet. Recent tracks. He followed them automatically, weapon ready, expecting to find stragglers or saboteurs. Instead, he found a family from yesterday. They had taken shelter in the ruins of what looked like a medical clinic. The young Zephyrian lay unconscious on a makeshift bed, while one adult worked frantically over its still form. The other adult kept watch, but was clearly exhausted, swaying on its feet. Marcus should have called for backup, should have opened fire, should have done anything except what he actually did. He stepped into the open, weapon lowered but ready. The watching Zephyrian spun toward him, raising its beam rifle. For a moment, they stared at each other across 20 feet of debris-strewn floor. Marcus could see the alien's large, luminous eyes calculating distances and odds. "I'm not here to fight," Marcus said quietly, knowing they probably couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone would carry the meaning. The Zephyrian's weapon stayed trained on him, but it didn't fire. Its companion looked up from the wounded child, and Marcus saw something in its expression that transcended species barriers: desperation. The young one was dying. Marcus slowly removed his field medical kit from his belt and placed it on the ground, then stepped back. The Zephyrian working on the child looked at the kit, then at Marcus, clearly confused. "For the kid," Marcus said, pointing at the medical supplies, then at the young Zephyrian. Understanding dawned in the alien's eyes. It said something in its musical language to its companion, who still kept Marcus covered but seemed less ready to shoot. The first alien approached the medical kit cautiously, examined it briefly, then looked back at Marcus with what might have been gratitude. Marcus backed away slowly, hands visible, until he was outside the clinic. He could have radioed for an airstrike, could have tossed a grenade through the window. Instead, he found a position where he could watch the building and settled in to wait. Hours passed. Marcus watched alien ships landing at the spaceport, evacuating Zephyrian forces. He watched human patrols move through other parts of the colony, searching for exactly what he had found. He watched and did nothing. Eventually, the 2 adults emerged from the clinic, carrying the young one between them. The child was conscious now, moving weakly but alive. They paused at the edge of the building's cover and looked back toward Marcus's position. The one who had been treating the child raised its hand in what was unmistakably a gesture of thanks. Then they were gone, moving quickly toward the spaceport and their evacuation ships. That night, Marcus lay in his sleeping bag staring at the alien stars. Riley and the others celebrated rumors that the Zephyrians were pulling back from this sector. A tactical victory for humanity, even though the cost had been another dead colony. Marcus felt no celebration. He kept thinking about the moment when he could have ended 3 alien lives, and chose not to. In a war where every enemy spared meant more human casualties later, what he'd done was probably treason. But he also kept thinking about the careful way those adults had treated their child's wounds, the exhaustion in their movements, the gratitude in that final gesture. War was supposed to make everything simple. Us versus them, good versus evil, kill or be killed. But sometimes Marcus was learning the simple answers were the wrong ones. The evacuation ships lifted off just before dawn, carrying the last Zephyrian forces away from Colony 7. In the growing light, Marcus could see the full extent of the destruction. Thousands of humans had died here. The Zephyrians had shown no mercy to his species. So why had he shown mercy to theirs? The question would haunt him for months to come, especially as the war grew more brutal. But somewhere in his heart, Marcus knew he'd made the right choice. In a universe full of violence and hatred, someone had to remember that mercy was still possible, even if it was just for one small alien family trying to survive in the ruins of war. The transport arrived that afternoon to evacuate the surviving human forces. As Marcus boarded, he took one last look at the bombed-out medical clinic where he'd made his choice. The building was empty now, but Somehow it felt significant, a place where something important had happened, even if no one else would ever know about it. "You okay, Chun?" Riley asked as they lifted off. "Yeah," Marcus replied, still staring out the window. "Just thinking." "About what?" Marcus watched Colony 7 shrink below them, another dead world in a war that seemed to have no end. "About what we're fighting for," he said finally. Riley nodded, misunderstanding completely. "To win. To survive. To make sure those alien bastards don't wipe us out." Marcus didn't correct him. How could he explain that sometimes, maybe survival meant more than just staying alive? That maybe humanity's greatest strength wasn't its ability to kill its enemies, but its capacity to recognize the humanity in them? The transport jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward the next battle, the next colony to defend or retake. The war would continue, brutal and unforgiving as ever. But for one brief moment on Colony 7, in the ruins of a medical clinic, a human soldier had chosen compassion over duty, mercy over tactics. It was a small thing, almost insignificant in the scope of an interstellar war. But sometimes small things change everything. 6 months after Colony 7, Marcus found himself stationed on Kepler Prime, the heavily fortified capital world of human space in this sector. The war had shifted into a brutal stalemate, with both sides dug in along a front that stretched across dozens of star systems. Every day brought reports of new battles, new casualties, new colonies lost or retaken. Marcus tried not to think about the Zephyrian family he'd spared. In the cold logic of military mathematics, his mercy had probably cost human lives. Every alien soldier who lived to fight another day meant more dead Marines, more burned colonies, more orphaned children. He was cleaning his rifle in the barracks when Lieutenant Cole approached with new orders. "Chun, you're being transferred to Intelligence Division. They want you for a special assignment." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Intelligence?" "Sir, I'm infantry, not a spy. Apparently someone noticed your language aptitude scores from basic training. Plus your field experience with Zephyrian tactics makes you valuable. Report to Director Harrison in an hour." The Intelligence Division occupied an entire floor of the military complex, humming with computers, holographic displays, and analysts studying every aspect of the alien threat. Director Harrison was a stern woman in her 50s, with the kind of sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. "Sergeant Chun," she said as he entered her office, "I've been reviewing your file. High scores in xenopsychology, linguistics, tactical analysis. Your squad leaders consistently rate you as observant and adaptable. Tell me, what do you think about our enemy?" It was an odd question. "They're dangerous, ma'am. Technologically superior in most areas. They fight with discipline and coordination. They seem to consider us an existential threat." That's the tactical assessment. I want a personal opinion. What do you think they're like as beings? Marcus hesitated. This felt like a test, but he wasn't sure what answer was expected. "They're not mindless monsters, if that's what you mean. They have families, social structures, emotions. They're fighting for something they believe in, just like we are." Harrison nodded slowly. "That's a mature perspective, Sergeant. Most soldiers see them as inhuman killing machines. It's easier that way, psychologically speaking. Your ability to see them as people while still fighting effectively is exactly why we need you." She activated a holographic display showing star charts and tactical positions. "We've been monitoring Zephyrian communications for months. Their encryption is sophisticated, but we've made some breakthroughs. What we've discovered is interesting." The display zoomed in on a sector map Marcus didn't recognize. 3 days ago, we intercepted a transmission from this system, Caridian 4. It's behind enemy lines, no strategic value we can identify. But the message was marked with the highest priority codes we've seen. What did it say? That's where it gets complicated. The message was partially garbled, but our linguists managed a rough translation. Someone or something called Sacred Mother Velith was requesting immediate assistance. She claimed a human had shown mercy to her offspring during what she called the burning of the seventh world. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Colony 7 had been the seventh human world attacked in this sector, and he knew exactly which Zephyrian family had been there during the burning. The transmission specifically requested information about human military personnel who served at Colony 7. She wants to find someone. Harrison's eyes locked onto his. Sergeant, is there anything about your time on Colony 7 that you haven't reported? The moment of truth. Marcus could lie, claim ignorance, and probably get away with it. Or he could tell the truth and face whatever consequences came. Yes, ma'am. There is. He told her everything. The family he'd tracked, the injured child, his decision to help instead of kill. Harrison listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he finished, the office was silent except for the hum of computers. Finally, Harrison leaned back in her chair. Sergeant, what you did was technically a violation of standing orders. You had clear shots on enemy combatants and failed to engage. Under normal circumstances, this would result in court-martial. Marcus nodded, ready to accept whatever punishment came. However, Harrison continued, these are not normal circumstances. The Zephyrian who sent that message, this sacred Mother Velith, appears to hold significant political power among their people. Our intelligence suggests she's some kind of religious leader, possibly equivalent to a high priestess or spiritual advisor. The star chart changed, showing Zephyrian fleet movements and political structures. We've been looking for a way to establish some form of communication with their leadership. Every attempt at negotiation has been rejected, usually with extreme violence. But this message suggests that at least one influential Zephyrian might be willing to talk. Marcus began to understand where this was going. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as a bridge. Our analysts believe Sacred Mother Velith is trying to arrange a meeting. The question is whether we let that happen, and under what circumstances. Harrison stood and moved to the window, looking out at the sprawling military base below. This war is destroying both our species, Sergeant. Billions dead on both sides. Entire worlds turned to ash. If there's even a small chance that your moment of compassion could lead to peace talks, we have to explore it. And if it's a trap? If this sacred Mother Velith just wants revenge for all the other Zephyrians I've killed? That's possible, which is why this mission is entirely voluntary. You'd be going into enemy territory with minimal backup, operating under deep cover. The risks are enormous. Marcus thought about the young Zephyrian he'd helped save, wondering if it had survived the war so far. He thought about all the human children who'd died in alien attacks, and all the alien families torn apart by human weapons. What would the mission involve? Harrison smiled for the first time since he'd entered her office. We've identified a neutral trading station at the edge of contested space, Haven Station. It's technically independent, used by smugglers and merchants from both sides. Our intelligence suggests Sacred Mother Velith has arranged to meet you there. She handed him a data pad with mission details. You'd go in as Marcus Chun, discharged Marine turned freelance trader. Your job would be to make contact, determine her intentions, and see if there's any possibility for meaningful dialogue between our species. Marcus scrolled through the mission parameters, noting the extreme classification level and the small list of people who are authorized to know about it. Who else knows about this? At this level, just us. Higher command has been briefed in general terms. They know we have a potential intelligence asset, but not the specific details. If this goes wrong, the official position will be that you went rogue. It was a suicide mission disguised as a diplomatic opportunity. Marcus had seen enough of the war to know how these things usually ended. But he also knew that someone had to try. When do I leave? The journey to Haven Station took 2 weeks aboard a converted cargo hauler that had seen better decades. Marcus traveled under false papers as an arms dealer, his cargo hold filled with legitimate weapons shipments that would establish his cover. The ship's captain, a grizzled veteran named Santos, asked no questions about their unusual destination. Haven Station was a ramshackle collection of docking bays, markets, and living spaces built around an asteroid in contested space. It survived because both sides found it useful, a place where unofficial business could be conducted away from prying eyes. Marcus set up shop in the station's main trading district, selling human military surplus to anyone with enough credits. It was boring work, but it gave him a chance to observe the station's mixed population and listen for any signs of Zephyrian presence. On his 3rd day, she found him. Marcus was examining a shipment of power cells when a shadow fell across his workstation. He looked up to see a tall Zephyrian female standing at the edge of his booth. She wore civilian clothes rather than military armor, but there was an unmistakable dignity in her bearing that marked her as someone important. "You are the human called Marcus Chun," she said in accented but clear English. It wasn't a question. Marcus set down the power cell carefully, his hand unconsciously moving toward his concealed sidearm. Around them, the market continued its normal bustle, but he could sense curious glances from other traders. "Depends who's asking," he replied. The Zephyrian stepped closer, and Marcus could see that her eyes were the same luminous blue he remembered from Colony 7. "I am Velith of the Sacred Waters, speaker for the wounded, mother of those who return to the light. I believe you know my offspring." The formal titles confirmed Harrison's intelligence, but Marcus was more interested in the pain he could hear beneath her careful words. This wasn't a military commander or political leader speaking. This was a mother. "Your child," he said quietly, "did survive." Something shifted in Velith's expression, a crack in her composed facade. "Kithra lives, thanks to your compassion. The healing medicines you provided saved her life when our own treatments failed." Relief flooded through Marcus, surprising him with its intensity. "I'm glad. I wondered. You wondered if your mercy was wasted on those who had shown none in return." Velith gestured to a quiet corner of the market. "Perhaps we might speak more privately." They found a small cafe that catered to the station's diverse population, sitting at a table in the back where their conversation couldn't be overheard. Velith ordered something that resembled tea, while Marcus stuck with coffee. "Your people and mine are engaged in a war that may consume us both," Velith said without preamble. "I have spent many cycles seeking to understand why this conflict began and how it might end. From what I've seen, your people think humans are a plague that needs to be eliminated, and your people see us as alien monsters bent on genocide." Velith's voice carried deep sadness. "Perhaps both sides are correct in their way, but perhaps there is another path." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agenda. All he saw was exhaustion and genuine grief. "What kind of path?" "The path of understanding. You showed mercy to my family when you had every right to kill us. That act has haunted my thoughts since that day. It suggests that despite our differences, we are not so unlike." Velith reached into her robes and produced a small device that she placed on the table between them. "This contains recordings, communications between our military leaders, intercepted human transmissions, reports from both sides of this conflict. I believe you will find them illuminating." "Why are you showing me this? And why me specifically?" "Because you alone among your species showed kindness when you could have chosen cruelty. Because my daughter speaks of you as the human who saved her when her own people had given up hope. Because I believe that if peace is possible, it will begin with individuals who understand that mercy is not weakness." Marcus looked at the device, knowing that accepting it would likely constitute treason under human military law. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to know the truth about this war, about how it started, about what both our peoples have lost, about what we stand to lose if it continues. And then, if you choose, I want you to help me find a way to end it." The cafe seemed to grow quiet around them, as if the universe itself was waiting for his answer. Marcus thought about Colony 7, about the human bodies in the playground, and the Zephyrian child bleeding in the ruins, about the endless cycle of violence that seemed to consume everything it touched. He reached out and took the device. "Tell me," he said. The data device contained 3 days' worth of recordings. Marcus spent sleepless nights in his cramped quarters aboard the station, absorbing information that turned his understanding of the war upside down. The first recording was a Zephyrian military briefing from 18 months ago. Marcus had to use translation software, but the meaning was clear enough. A Zephyrian commander was reporting to his superiors about human expansion into what they called the sacred reaches, star systems that held deep religious significance to their people. "The humans show no regard for the ancestral worlds," the commander said. "They strip mine our holy sites for resources and build their colonies on the bones of our ancestors. The Sacred Council has declared this desecration intolerable." The next file was a human intelligence report from the same time period. Marcus recognized the bureaucratic language of colonial administration, describing survey results from recently discovered star systems. The report mentioned unusual crystalline formations with potential applications in quantum computing and excellent mineral deposits suitable for industrial exploitation. No mention of religious significance. No indication that these worlds were anything more than resources to be harvested. Marcus kept reading, watching the escalation unfold through intercepted communications and battle reports. The first Zephyrian attack had targeted a human mining operation on what they called Sanctity Prime. The humans had responded by reinforcing their colonies and bringing in military support. The Zephyrians had escalated in turn, eventually declaring a holy war against human expansion. But there were other voices in the recordings: Zephyrian peace factions arguing for negotiation, human diplomats trying to establish communication channels. All of them had been ignored or silenced as the violence escalated. Interesting reading, Velith asked. Marcus looked up to find her standing in the doorway of his quarters. He'd been so absorbed in the data that he hadn't heard her approach. How did you get in here? The station's security systems are not particularly sophisticated. Also, I wish to speak with you privately, away from the listening devices that undoubtedly monitor the public areas. She moved into the room, her tall frame seeming to fill the small space. Have you discovered what you expected to find? I don't know what I expected, Marcus said honestly. Maybe evidence that one side or the other was completely evil. Instead, I found a lot of misunderstanding and fear. Velith settled onto the room's single chair, her movements graceful despite its obvious unsuitability for her physiology. Fear is the foundation of all conflict. Your people fear that we will destroy them. My people fear that you will destroy the sacred places that connect us to our ancestors. Both fears have proven justified. Marcus gestured at the datapad. This says the first human colonies in your sacred systems were established 3 years before the war started. 3 years when your people could have made contact, explained the situation, found a solution. And in those same 3 years, your people could have attempted to understand what they were encountering instead of simply taking what they wanted. Velith's voice remained calm, but Marcus could hear the underlying pain. Both sides chose to assume the worst about the other. So what changed? Why are you reaching out now? Velith was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because my daughter asked me to. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Your daughter? The one from Colony 7. Kithara is unique among our people. She was born with what you might call an empathic gift, the ability to sense the emotional states of others, even across species barriers. When you chose to help her instead of killing her, she felt your compassion directly. Velith looked up, meeting his eyes. She has spent the months since Colony 7 insisting that not all humans are the soulless destroyers or propaganda claims. She speaks of the gentle sadness she felt from you, the regret for all the death around you, the hope that somehow the violence could end. She's just a child. She doesn't understand the complexities of war. Perhaps that is precisely why her understanding matters more than ours. Velith leaned forward. Children see clearly what adults have trained themselves to ignore. My daughter sees humans as people, not monsters. She has convinced me to try to see as she does. Marcus thought about all the alien children who died in human attacks, all the human children killed in Zephyrian raids. War had a way of making monsters of everyone eventually. Even if you and I wanted to end this war, how could we? Neither of us has the authority to negotiate peace. No, but we have something more powerful than authority. We have a story. Velith produced another device, this one a small recording unit. I have been documenting our conversations, with your permission. The story of a human soldier who chose mercy over duty, and a Zephyrian mother who chose understanding over hatred. These recordings will go to the Sacred Council and to your intelligence services. You want to use us as propaganda? I want to use us as proof that another way is possible. But first, I need to ask something of you that may be difficult to accept. Marcus waited, knowing he wouldn't like whatever came next. I want you to meet my daughter. The request hung in the air between them like an armed grenade. Marcus could think of a dozen reasons why it was a terrible idea. Security risks, psychological trauma for the child, the potential for it all to be an elaborate trap. She's here, on the station. She insisted on coming. When I told her I had found the human who saved her, she demanded to meet you properly. She has many questions. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. This is insane. If my superiors knew I was even talking to you, they'd court-martial me. If they knew I was meeting with alien civilians, then perhaps your superiors need not know. This meeting is not for them, or for mine. It is for a child who believes that understanding between our peoples is possible. Against every bit of training and common sense he possessed, Marcus found himself nodding. Where? There's a garden section near the station's hydroponics bay. Neutral ground, public enough to be safe, private enough for honest conversation. 1 hour. The hydroponics garden was a small miracle of engineering, a green space carved out of the asteroid's rocky interior. Plants from dozens of worlds grew under artificial sunlight, creating a peaceful oasis in the station's industrial environment. Marcus arrived early and positioned himself where he could watch the entrances. He'd brought his sidearm, though he hoped desperately he wouldn't need it. The whole situation felt surreal, a human marine sneaking around a smuggler station to meet secretly with an alien child. They appeared at the far end of the garden, Velith, and a smaller figure that had to be Kithara. Even at a distance, Marcus could see the family resemblance. The young Zephyrian had the same luminous eyes as her mother, though her skin was a deeper blue, and she moved with the careful gait of someone still recovering from injury. As they approached, Marcus got his first clear look at the child he'd helped save. She was smaller than he'd remembered, probably the equivalent of a human 10-year-old. Her legs showed evidence of the injury from Colony 7, a slight limp that would probably never fully heal. Kithara, Velith said quietly, "This is Marcus Chun, the human I told you about." The young Zephyrian studied him with an intensity that was uncomfortable. Marcus had the strange feeling that she was seeing things about him that he'd prefer to keep hidden. "You're sad," she said in carefully pronounced English. "Why do you carry so much sadness?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. It's complicated. Is it because of the war? Because of all the dying?" Marcus knelt down to be closer to her eye level, noting how Velith tensed slightly at the movement. "Yes, partly. War makes everyone sad, even the people fighting it." Kithara nodded solemnly. "I feel the sadness from the other humans, too, when they're fighting. They don't want to hurt people, but they think they have to. Just like our soldiers." The child's matter-of-fact assessment of battlefield psychology was unervingly accurate. How can you feel things from humans? Well, the different species. Emotions are like colors, Kithara said, searching for words. Different species have different ways of showing them, but the colors underneath are the same. Fear is always red, no matter who feels it. Sadness is always blue. And kindness. She reached out tentatively and touched his hand. Marcus felt a strange, tingling sensation, as if static electricity was building between their skin. "Kindness is always gold," she finished. "You have very bright gold around you. That's how I knew you wouldn't hurt us on the dead world." "The dead world. That's what we call the place where you found us. You're Colony 7. So many people died there that the whole planet feels gray now." Marcus thought about the playground, the bodies of children who'd never grow up. "I am sorry. I'm sorry your people, and mine couldn't find a better way." Kithara's grip on his hand tightened. "But we can find a better way now, can't we? That's why Mother brought me here. To show you that we're not monsters, and to show her that humans aren't monsters either." Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus thought. This child understood something that had escaped both species' leadership, that the enemy wasn't inherently evil, just afraid. "Kithara," he said carefully, "what do you think should happen? To end the war, I mean. The scared people need to stop being scared," she said as if it were obvious. "They need to meet each other and see that everyone just wants their families to be safe." "It's not that simple," Velith said gently. "There are many people on both sides who have lost much in this war. They want revenge, not peace. Then, they need to meet more people like Marcus," Kithara replied. "People who understand that revenge just makes more dead worlds." Marcus looked between mother and daughter, seeing in them everything the war had taught him to hate and fear. But, sitting in this peaceful garden, watching a child speak wisdom that shamed both species' leaders, he found it impossible to see them as enemies. "What do you want from me?" he asked Velith. Really, I want you to return to your people and tell them what you have learned. That we're not the soulless destroyers your propaganda claims. That we have families, hopes, fears, just as you do. And I want you to tell them about me, Kithra added. Tell them that the young Zephyrian you saved grew up and wants the killing to stop. My superiors aren't going to listen to field intelligence that contradicts their strategic assumptions. They're going to assume this is all an elaborate deception. Velith nodded sadly. Perhaps, but seeds of understanding grow slowly. Your intelligence services will investigate my claims, verify the information I provided. Some will begin to question the absolute necessity of this war. And if they don't, if both sides are too committed to the violence to consider peace, then at least we will have tried, and perhaps others will follow our example. Velith stood, clearly preparing to leave. There's one more thing I must tell you. Marcus waited, sensing bad news coming. The Sacred Council has authorized a final offensive against your core worlds. They call it the Cleansing Dawn, a decisive strike to end human expansion permanently. It will launch within the next month. The blood drained from Marcus's face. How many ships? Everything we have. The entire war fleet, plus reserves that have never seen battle. They intend to destroy your capital worlds so completely that your species will never recover. Marcus's mind raced through the implications. The human fleet was already stretched thin, holding the current front lines. A massive Zephyrian offensive would shatter their defenses, leaving Earth and the inner colonies defenseless. Why are you telling me this? It's the kind of intelligence that could save millions of human lives. Because those millions of lives include many like you, people who might choose compassion over hatred if given the chance. I cannot prevent the Cleansing Dawn, but perhaps you can help your people prepare for it. Velith placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. And because Kithra made me promise to warn you, she says the golden light around you is too precious to let the war extinguish it. They walked away together, leaving Marcus alone in the garden with information that could change the course of the war. As he watched them disappear into the station's corridors, he realized that his simple choice to spare a family on Colony 7 had set in motion events that neither he nor anyone else could control. The war was about to enter its final phase, and somehow he'd become a key player in determining how it ended. The emergency briefing room on Kepler Prime buzzed with tension as Marcus finished his report. Admiral Richardson sat at the head of the table, her weathered face showing no emotion as she processed the intelligence he'd brought back from Haven Station. Around the table, the assembled officers of high command absorbed the reality of what they were facing. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Sergeant," Richardson said, her voice dangerously calm. "You're telling us that you've been in direct communication with a high-ranking enemy operative, and that this operative has warned you of an imminent massive assault on our core worlds." "Yes, ma'am. The intelligence appears genuine, corroborated by patterns we've observed in their fleet movements over the past weeks." Colonel Hayes, the head of strategic planning, leaned forward. "It could be disinformation designed to make us redeploy our forces defensively, leaving their current positions vulnerable. It could be," Marcus agreed, "but the source seems credible. And the cost of being wrong. The cost of being wrong about intelligence from an alien terrorist is acceptable," General Morrison interrupted. "The cost of reorganizing our entire defensive strategy based on enemy propaganda could lose us the war." Director Harrison, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "Admiral, with respect, I think we need to consider the broader implications of Sergeant Chen's contact. This Velith individual has provided detailed intelligence about Zephyrian political structure, religious beliefs, and internal conflicts that we've never been able to obtain through conventional means." Richardson studied the data pad in front of her. "Intelligence that could be carefully crafted disinformation. We know the Zephyrians are sophisticated in their psychological warfare. But what if it's not?" Marcus found himself saying, then immediately regretted speaking out of turn. The room went silent, all eyes turning to him. Admiral Richardson's gaze was ice-cold. "Sergeant, you seem to have developed an unusual concern for enemy welfare. Perhaps you'd like to explain why we should trust the word of beings who have spent 3 years trying to exterminate our species." Marcus felt the weight of the moment. Everything he said next would determine not just his own fate, but potentially the fate of billions of lives on both sides. Because I've seen them as more than just enemies, ma'am. They have families, children, hopes for the future. They're fighting this war for the same reason we are, because they're afraid of what will happen if they lose. Touching, Morrison sneered, but irrelevant. Our job is to protect humanity, not to sympathize with the aliens trying to kill us. But what if those two things are the same? Marcus pressed on, knowing he was probably ending his career, but unable to stop. What if the only way to truly protect humanity is to find a way to end this war before it destroys both our species? Richardson's expression didn't change. Sergeant Shun, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full psychological evaluation and security review. Your access to classified materials is revoked, and you will be confined to quarters until further notice. Admiral, Harrison interjected, perhaps we should consider the intelligence on its own merits, regardless of its source. The intelligence will be analyzed through proper channels, Richardson replied curtly. But I will not make strategic decisions based on the emotional attachments of a compromised operative. Marcus was escorted from the briefing room by 2 military police officers, knowing that he'd probably just thrown away any chance of preventing the catastrophe Velith had warned him about. As the doors closed behind him, he caught a glimpse of Harrison's face. She looked like someone who understood that they'd just made a terrible mistake. His quarters felt like a prison cell, despite being identical to the room he'd occupied for months. Marcus paced the small space, running through scenarios in his head. Every military instinct he possessed screamed that the cleansing dawn was real, that massive Zephyrian fleet movements were building towards something unprecedented. But even if he was right, what could he do about it? He was one sergeant with no authority, no resources, and apparently no credibility with his own command structure. The door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see Harrison entering with a datapad and a grim expression. Director? I thought I was confined to quarters. You are. I'm here in my capacity as your psychological evaluator. Harrison activated a small device that would defeat any listening devices in the room. We need to talk. Marcus waited, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. I've been analyzing the intelligence you brought back, Harrison said quietly. Cross-referencing it with satellite observations, intercepted communications, fleet movement patterns. Everything checks out, Marcus. The cleansing dawn is real. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by dread. Then, why won't the Admiral authorize defensive preparations? Because she can't afford to be wrong. If we pull back our forward positions to defend the core worlds, and this turns out to be a feint, we lose the war immediately. And if we're right but can't stop the attack anyway. Harrison shrugged helplessly. She's trapped between 2 impossible choices. So what happens now? Harrison was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with something. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Now I'm going to ask you to do something that could get us both court-martialed or executed for treason. Marcus felt his stomach drop. What? I want you to go back to Haven Station. Not as part of an official mission, but as a private citizen who's been discharged from the service for psychological instability. You want me to defect. I want you to try to prevent the end of human civilization. Harrison's eyes were intense, desperate. You've established contact with what appears to be a Zephyrian peace faction. If there's any chance, any possibility at all, that this Velith can influence their leadership to call off the attack. You're asking me to commit treason on the off chance that an alien I met twice might be able to stop her own military. I'm asking you to save our species. Harrison placed the datapad on his desk. These are your discharge papers, backdated 3 days. Officially, you've been dismissed from service for psychological instability following your exposure to enemy propaganda. There's a civilian transport leaving for the border territories in 6 hours. Marcus stared at the documents, understanding the magnitude of what Harrison was proposing. If he took this path, there would be no coming back. He would be a traitor to his own species, gambling everything on the hope that mercy and understanding could overcome 3 years of hatred and fear. What if I can't contact her? What if she can't influence their leaders? What if this is all an elaborate trap designed to neutralize the one human who knows about their attack? Then, We're no worse off than we are now, except that humanity loses one more soldier. Harrison stood to leave. The choice is yours, Marcus. But choose quickly. The transport won't wait. After she left, Marcus sat in the silence of his quarters, staring at the discharge papers. Everything rational told him this was suicide. He had no guarantee that Velith could be reached, no assurance that she had any real influence, no evidence that the Zephyrians were even capable of calling off an attack once it was authorized. But he kept thinking about Kithra's words in the garden, that the scared people needed to stop being scared, that they needed to meet each other and see that everyone just wanted their families to be safe. Maybe she was right. Maybe the answer to this war wasn't in superior firepower or clever tactics, but in the simple recognition that both sides were fighting for the same thing. Marcus picked up the datapad and began preparing for what would probably be his final mission. The transport to the border territories was a rust bucket freighter that had seen better decades. Marcus traveled under his real name now. No more false identities or military cover stories. According to his official records, he was a former Marine suffering from combat stress and alien-induced paranoia, seeking work in the outer colonies where such problems were common. The other passengers were a mix of refugees, traders, and people running from various troubles. Nobody asked questions, and Marcus didn't volunteer information. He spent the 3-day journey reviewing everything he knew about Zephyrian culture and politics, trying to devise a plan that didn't end with him being vaporized on sight. Haven Station looked exactly as he'd left it 2 weeks earlier, but everything felt different now. He was no longer Sergeant Chun on a classified intelligence mission. He was Marcus Chun, civilian, carrying the desperate hopes of his entire species. Finding Velith proved easier than expected. Marcus had barely set up his cover identity as a trader when she appeared at his booth, moving with the same quiet dignity he remembered. "You have returned," she said simply. "This was not expected. We need to talk. Urgently." Velith studied his face, perhaps reading something in his expression that alarmed her. "You appear different, more desperate." "Because I'm desperate. My people know about the cleansing dawn." For the first time since he'd known her, Velith showed genuine surprise. "How is this possible? You told me about it, remember? I reported the intelligence to my commanders. And they believed you?" Marcus gave a bitter laugh. "They threw me out of the service for treason and enemy sympathy. Officially, I'm a discharged Marine with psychological problems." "Then, why have you returned?" "Because someone has to try to stop this war before it kills everyone we care about." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Velith, how much influence do you really have with the Sacred Council?" "Very little in matters of war. I am a spiritual advisor, not a military leader." Marcus felt his heart sink. "Then, why did you warn me? Why risk everything to make contact if you can't actually change anything?" "Because sometimes the impossible becomes possible when people refuse to accept the inevitable." Velith gestured toward the station's central corridors. "Kulme, there is someone you need to meet." They walked through the station's maze of passages until they reached what appeared to be a cargo bay that had been converted into temporary living space. Inside, Marcus was surprised to find not just Kithra, but nearly a dozen other Zephyrians of various ages. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. "Believers," Velith replied. "Those who think as we do, that this war has gone too far, that there must be another way." An elderly Zephyrian approached them, moving with the careful dignity of advanced age. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made Marcus instinctively straighten. "So this is the human who saved young Kithra," the elder said. "I am Nethes, former commander of the Third Fleet. I have come to understand that you may be our last hope for preventing the final catastrophe." "Former commander?" Marcus asked. "I was relieved of duty for questioning the wisdom of the cleansing dawn. It seems both our species have little patience for those who advocate restraint in wartime." Marcus looked around the group, seeing in their faces the same mixture of hope and desperation he felt. "How many others think like you do?" "More than the war faction believes, but fewer than we need," Nethes admitted. "The Sacred Council has been dominated by those who see this conflict as a holy war that must be won at any cost. Then, how can we possibly stop an attack that's already been authorized?" Kithra stepped forward, her young face serious beyond her years. by showing them that humans and Zephyrians can work together, by proving that the war doesn't have to end with one side destroying the other. A noble sentiment, Marcus said gently, but I'm not sure the Sacred Council will be impressed by good intentions. Perhaps not, Velith agreed, but they might be impressed by practical results. Tell me, Marcus, what would it take to convince your people to accept a ceasefire? Marcus thought about Admiral Richardson, about the hatred and fear that had driven 3 years of escalating violence. Proof that your people are serious about peace. Some kind of gesture that can't be explained as a military trick. And what would convince my people of human sincerity? Nethys asked. The same thing. Some act that demonstrates good faith, that shows we're not the soulless destroyers your propaganda claims. The group fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The problem seemed impossible. How could two species that had spent years learning to hate each other suddenly begin to trust again? I have an idea, Kithra said quietly, but it's very dangerous. Everyone turned to look at the young Zephyrian, waiting for her to continue. What if we went together to the Sacred Council? A human and a Zephyrian standing side by side, asking them to stop the killing. Child, Nethys said gently, they would never listen to such a request, and they might well execute the human for daring to appear before them. But they couldn't ignore it, Kithra insisted. The very fact that a human had come to plead for peace would force them to question everything they believe about your species. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. The plan was completely insane, likely to get them all killed, and just might be brilliant enough to work. She's right, he said slowly. It would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. Either they'd have to acknowledge that humans are capable of seeking peace, or they'd have to execute me in front of the entire council, which would make you a martyr and potentially trigger even greater violence, Velith pointed out. Or it would shock them into realizing what they're about to do, Marcus countered. Sometimes people need to see the consequences of their choices made manifest. Nethys studied him with ancient eyes. You would truly risk this? Travel into the heart of our space, appear before our highest religious authority, and plead for the lives of those who consider you an enemy. If it means preventing the cleansing dawn? Yes. The old warrior nodded slowly. Then, perhaps there is hope for both our species after all. The Zephyrian homeworld of Sanctuary was nothing like Marcus had expected. Instead of the militaristic fortress he'd imagined, he found a world of impossible beauty. Crystalline spires that sang in harmonic frequencies with the wind, gardens that seemed to grow in mathematical patterns, and cities that appeared to flow organically from the landscape itself. He rode in silence beside Velith as their transport approached the Sacred Council's complex, watching alien architecture that challenged every assumption he'd made about Zephyrian culture. These weren't the works of a species bent on mindless destruction. They were the creations of beings who understood beauty, harmony, and the delicate balance between civilization and nature. It's not what you expected, Velith observed, noting his expression. I thought it would be more militaristic. Harder. More like the ships and weapons we've been fighting. War brings out the worst in any species. Our military technology represents our capacity for destruction, but this represents our capacity for creation. Velith gestured toward a spiraling tower that seemed to defy gravity. Perhaps understanding one helps explain the other. The Sacred Council convened in a chamber carved from a single massive crystal, its faceted walls refracting light into patterns that shifted with the speaker's emotions. Marcus stood in the center of the room, acutely aware that he was probably the first human to ever set foot in this holy space. Around him, 12 figures in flowing robes sat on raised platforms, their faces hidden beneath ceremonial masks. At their head sat the High Celestial, an ancient Zephyrian whose presence seemed to fill the chamber with quiet authority. So, the High Celestial said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, this is the human who claims to speak for peace. I don't claim to speak for anyone but myself, Marcus replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. I'm here because I believe this war doesn't have to end with one of our species destroying the other. Interesting words from a member of the species that has desecrated our most sacred sites and murdered thousands of our children. The speaker was one of the masked council members, his tone dripping with contempt. And I could say the same about your people's attacks on our colonies, Marcus replied. But recounting past grievances won't solve anything. The question is whether we want this cycle of violence to continue until both our peoples are extinct. The human speaks boldly for one standing in our most sacred chamber, another council member said. Perhaps too boldly. The High Celestial raised a hand for silence. Let him speak. It is not often that our enemies come to us seeking understanding rather than surrender. Marcus took a breath, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. 3 months ago, I was a soldier fighting in the ruins of Colony 7. I had perfect shots at 3 Zephyrian combatants, including what appeared to be a wounded child. Military doctrine said I should have taken those shots. He paused, looking around the chamber at the masked figures who held the power to determine the fate of both species. Instead, I helped treat the child's wounds and let them escape. That decision led me here, to this moment, standing before you and asking you to consider that mercy is not weakness. You speak of one moment of sentiment, the contemptuous council member replied. What are the thousands of our people your species has killed? What are the sacred worlds you have defiled? What are the thousands of humans your people have killed? Marcus countered. What are the children who died in your orbital bombardments? We can trade atrocities until the end of time, or we can acknowledge that both sides have done terrible things in the name of survival and fear. The High Celestial leaned forward slightly. And what would you have us do? Abandon our duty to protect the sacred places entrusted to our care. I would have you consider that protection doesn't always require destruction. My people didn't know those worlds were sacred to you. If you had made contact 3 years ago, explained their significance, we could have found another way. Your people take what they want without regard for others, another council member said. Why should we believe they would have listened? Marcus felt the weight of the moment, the impossibility of bridging 3 years of hatred and misunderstanding with words alone. Then, he remembered Kithra's simple wisdom about scared people needing to stop being scared. Because some of us are capable of learning, he said quietly. Because some of us understand that the universe is vast enough for both our species to thrive without destroying each other. Pretty words, the contemptuous member scoffed. But words cannot undo what has been done. The cleansing dawn will proceed as planned. Your species will be eliminated before it can spread its poison further across the galaxy. And then what? Marcus asked, his voice rising with desperation. After you've committed genocide against 6 billion humans, what then? Do you think the universe will be safer? Do you think your children will sleep better knowing their parents chose extermination over understanding? The chamber fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of 12 ancient minds considering his words, weighing them against years of accumulated hatred and fear. You speak as if our decision were made from malice, the High Celestial said finally. But we have seen what your species does to worlds it considers valuable. We have watched you strip mine entire systems, poison atmospheres, exterminate native life forms without thought or care. How can we trust that you will not do the same to us? Because some of us are trying to be better than our worst impulses, Marcus replied, just as some of you are trying to be better than yours. He gestured toward where Velith stood at the edge of the chamber. Sacred Mother Velith could have used the information about our meeting to set a trap, to capture or kill me for her people's glory. Instead, she chose to warn me about your attack plans, hoping that communication might prevent further bloodshed. One individual's sentiment does not represent the character of an entire species, a council member observed. Doesn't it? Marcus challenged. Isn't every species defined by the choices its individuals make? When I chose to spare Velith's family, I was choosing what kind of human I wanted to be. When she chose to reach out for peace instead of revenge, she was choosing what kind of Zephyrian she wanted to be. The High Celestial was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a sadness that seemed to fill the crystal chamber. You ask us to gamble the safety of our entire species on faith in human nature, to trust that your people will choose wisdom over greed, cooperation over exploitation. And I'm asking my people to make the same gamble about yours, Marcus replied. To trust that Zephyrians are capable of choosing understanding over hatred, mercy over revenge. Your people. Another council member leaned forward. You speak as if you still represent humanity, yet our intelligence indicates you have been cast out by your own military. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. I represent the humans who believe that this war is destroying the best parts of both our species. The humans who think there has to be a better way than mutual annihilation. And how many humans share this belief? The High Celestial asked. I don't know. Maybe not enough. But maybe all it takes is a few individuals willing to risk everything for peace. The chamber fell into a contemplative silence. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, feel sweat gathering despite the cool air. Everything he'd said, everything he'd risked, came down to this moment. There is wisdom in the human's words, one council member said finally. Perhaps it is time to consider whether our path leads to justice or merely to a different kind of destruction. The sacred worlds must be protected, another insisted. This is not negotiable, but perhaps they could be protected without exterminating an entire species, the High Celestial mused. Perhaps there are other ways to ensure the sanctity of our ancestral grounds. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. If my people knew which systems were sacred to you, if they understood their significance, they could be declared off-limits to human expansion. Protected zones that both species respect. And what guarantee would we have that your people would honor such agreements? The same guarantee I have that you won't vaporize me the moment I leave this chamber, Marcus replied. Trust has to start somewhere. The contemptuous council member laughed bitterly. Trust? After 3 years of war? After thousands dead on both sides? Because of 3 years of war. Marcus corrected. Because of thousands dead on both sides. How many more have to die before we admit that violence isn't solving anything? The High Celestial rose from her seat, her ancient form moving with surprising grace. The human has given us much to consider. We will deliberate on these matters. Marcus felt his heart sink. Deliberation meant delay, and delay meant the cleansing dawn would proceed as planned. Your Holiness, with respect, there isn't time for extended deliberation. The attack is scheduled to launch soon. Are you presuming to dictate timing to the Sacred Council? The contemptuous member demanded. I'm presuming to point out that some decisions can't wait for perfect certainty. Marcus shot back. Sometimes you have to choose based on hope rather than guarantees. The High Celestial studied him for a long moment. And what would you have us do? Call off our final offensive based on the pleas of a single human. I would have you call off your final offensive based on the possibility that there's a better way forward. That maybe, just maybe, this war can end with understanding instead of extinction. Another long silence fell over the chamber. Marcus could feel the weight of history balancing on a knife's edge, the future of both species hanging on the decisions made in the next few minutes. Very well, the High Celestial said finally. We will postpone the cleansing dawn for 7 days. In that time, you will return to your people and attempt to secure guarantees regarding our sacred worlds. If you succeed, we will consider a formal ceasefire. If you fail, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus bowed deeply, knowing he'd just bought 7 days for humanity's survival and praying it would be enough. 7 days, he repeated. I'll need some way to communicate with you, to coordinate any agreements. Velith will serve as our representative in these matters, the High Celestial decided. She has already demonstrated her commitment to this path. As the council dismissed, Marcus felt the weight of impossible expectations settling on his shoulders. He had 1 week to convince the human leadership to accept peace terms with an enemy they'd spent 3 years learning to hate. 1 week to prevent the extinction of his own species. But as he left the crystal chamber, he thought about Kithra's simple faith that scared people could choose to stop being scared. Maybe, just maybe, she was right. The journey back to human space felt like traveling through a dream. Marcus carried with him preliminary terms from the Zephyrian Peace faction, a proposal for protected sacred zones, mutual non-aggression pacts, and shared oversight of disputed territories. On paper, it looked reasonable. In the context of a 3-year holy war, it looked like naive fantasy. Admiral Richardson's reaction was exactly what Marcus had expected. You want us to negotiate with terrorists who have spent 3 years trying to exterminate humanity? She said, her voice ice cold. And you expect us to take seriously peace terms delivered by a discharged Marine who's clearly been compromised by enemy propaganda? Admiral, they've agreed to postpone their final offensive. That alone should tell you they're serious about exploring alternatives to total war. Or it tells us they're buying time to prepare for an even more devastating attack. Marcus placed the Zephyrian proposals on her desk. Then, analyze the terms. Have your staff examine every detail. But consider the possibility that some members of their leadership actually want this war to end. Richardson didn't touch the documents. Sergeant, excuse me, Mr. Chun, you seem to have forgotten that these aliens have murdered millions of human beings. They've glassed entire colonies, targeted civilian populations, shown no mercy to anyone who stands in their way. And we've done the same to them, Marcus replied quietly. This war has brought out the worst in both our species. The question is whether we're capable of bringing out the best as well. The best. Richardson's voice rose dangerously. The best way to protect humanity is to eliminate the threat that's trying to destroy us, not to negotiate with it. Marcus felt familiar desperation rising in his chest. Admiral, in 5 days, they're going to launch an assault that will overwhelm our defenses and destroy every human world in this sector. Maybe every human world, period. Our only chance is to prove that we're something other than the monsters they think we are. Our only chance is to fight until we win or die trying. That's what humans do. We don't surrender to alien overlords who demand we abandon our colonial expansion. They're not demanding surrender. They're asking for recognition that some things are sacred, that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. Richardson finally picked up the Zephyrian proposals, but only to throw them in the waste disposal unit. The only boundary that matters is the one between human space and alien space. And we'll defend that boundary with everything we have. Marcus watched 3 years of work dissolve into recycled particles. Then you're condemning our entire species to death for the sake of pride. I'm protecting our species from extinction at the hands of alien fanatics. Now get out of my office before I have you arrested for sedition. Marcus left the Admiral's office knowing that his official diplomatic mission had failed completely. But as he walked through the corridors of the military complex, he realized that official channels weren't the only way to change minds. Director Harrison found him in a civilian cafe near the spaceport, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at nothing. I heard about your meeting with the Admiral, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. She wouldn't even consider the proposals. To her, accepting peace terms is the same as surrendering to alien tyranny. Harrison was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward conspiratorially. What if I told you that not everyone in the command structure shares her perspective? Marcus looked up, sensing hope where he'd expected none. What do you mean? I mean, there are others who've been analyzing the intelligence you brought back, others who understand that we're facing extinction if this war continues. The Admiral may control official policy, but she doesn't control every individual in the chain of command. What are you suggesting? Harrison slid a data pad across the table. A list of every colonial administrator, fleet commander, and senior officer who has access to direct communication with the front lines. People who might be willing to listen to alternatives, even if they can't officially endorse them. Marcus scrolled through the list, recognizing names from across human space. You want me to contact them individually? To try to build support for peace negotiations outside official channels. I want you to plant seeds of doubt about the inevitability of total war. To show them that there are Zephyrians who want peace just as much as we do. That's borderline sedition. That's survival. Harrison's expression was grim. Marcus, our intelligence projections show that even if we somehow survive the cleansing dawn, this war will consume both species within the next 2 years. Someone has to try a different approach. Marcus pocketed the data pad, knowing he was probably signing up for another doomed mission. But thinking about Kithara's faith in the possibility of understanding, he realized that doomed missions were sometimes the only ones worth undertaking. I'll need transportation, communication equipment, and credentials that will get me past security screening. Already arranged. There's a fast courier ship waiting at Base 7, with clearance to visit any human installation in this sector. As Marcus stood to leave, Harrison caught his arm. Marcus, there's something else. We've been monitoring Zephyrian communications, and there are signs of internal conflict among their leadership. Not everyone supports the cleansing dawn, but the faction that does is getting stronger every day you delay. Then, I better not delay any longer. The next 5 days passed in a blur of desperate travel and increasingly frustrating conversations. Marcus visited 17 different installations, spoke to 43 senior officers, and presented the Zephyrian peace proposals to anyone who would listen. The responses ranged from cautious interest to outright hostility. A few commanders expressed willingness to consider alternatives to total war, but most seemed trapped by the same fear and hatred that had driven 3 years of escalating violence. On his final day, Marcus found himself on a frontier station commanded by Colonel Sarah Chun, a distant cousin who'd joined the Colonial Marines for many of the same reasons he had. She listened to his presentation in thoughtful silence, asking detailed questions about Zephyrian culture and the specifics of their peace proposals. "You really believe they're sincere?" she asked when he finished. "I believe some of them are, just like some of us are." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars visible through her office window. "You know what the hardest part of this war has been for me? Not the fighting, not the casualties, not even the fear of dying. It's been learning to hate. I joined the military to protect people, not to become someone who rejoices in the death of other beings. Then, help me prove that protection doesn't require hatred. What do you need?" Marcus felt the first real hope he'd experienced in days. "I need someone with command authority to authorize direct communication with the Zephyrian peace faction, to open a channel that bypasses both military hierarchies and creates space for actual negotiation. That would be direct violation of orders. That would be taking responsibility for preventing genocide." Sarah turned from the window to face him directly. "If I do this, if I authorize communication with the enemy, I'll be court-martialed, possibly executed for treason. If you don't do this, there might not be a command structure left to court-martial anyone." Another long silence. Then, Sarah moved to her communication console and began entering authorization codes. "I'm opening a priority channel to Zephyrian space," she said formally. "Duration, 24 hours. Purpose, emergency diplomatic consultation." Marcus felt tears he hadn't expected gathering in his eyes. "Sarah, don't thank me yet. Thank me if this actually works." The communication with Velith came through 12 hours later, her image wavering slightly on the emergency channel. Behind her, Marcus could see what appeared to be a Zephyrian command ship, with other peace faction members moving urgently in the background. "Marcus," she said without preamble, "time has run out. The war faction has override the Sacred Council's decision to delay. The Cleansing Dawn launches in 6 hours." Marcus felt the universe tilt around him. "What happened? I thought you had 7 days. Agents loyal to the war faction leaked news of our negotiations to the general population. They're claiming that the peace faction has been corrupted by human influence, that our willingness to negotiate proves that we've forgotten our duty to the ancestors. Can you stop it? Is there any way to prevent the launch?" Velith's expression was heartbreaking in its despair.